You can buy it over there for some amount of money. I'm not sure how much. But we're going to play a lot of old songs tonight. This one's called Justify Black Eye. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. You guys doing okay? Yeah, I'm sick. Little bastard kids, right? You know, they always bring it home from daycare, right? Yeah, I'm sick, but anyway. Now you got me thinking about it, so I'm coughing. Okay. I'm going to give you back your exams here. Okay, but before we jump into that, why would I pick this song for today? What's that? Right? The song's all about somebody who stays in a really awful relationship, right? And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. Okay, we're going to finish up talking about some stuff about attraction and mate selection and things along those lines. And then we're going to move into relationships and how they develop and looking at a theory that can explain why people stay in relationships and why people leave relationships. And it can actually use that theory to understand why somebody might stay in a bad relationship like this. All right? This theory, I like teaching about this theory for a variety of reasons. I think I mentioned this to you before. One, it's an economic model. It's mathematical. I like numbers. I'm a stats nerd. Okay? I really like that stuff. Okay? So I like that. All right? The other reason is because it's pretty universal. And if you understand this theory, you can start using it to help you understand all types of relationships. And it can even help you and say that you have a friend who's in a bad relationship like this, an abusive relationship. It can help you, A, understand why they stay, and B, it can also help you understand how you can help them get out, right? Because remember, we talked about what's social psychology, what's really important in psychology, or social psychology? It's what we perceive, right? Okay, it's not reality, it's the perception of reality. And that's the important thing about this theory that we're going to talk about here is how are people perceiving the situation and how are they perceiving their alternatives? Does that make sense? And it can explain, once you look at it that way, you can say, okay, I understand why somebody might stay in a bad relationship. But also it gives you an opportunity for seeing, well, I can't change all of these aspects, but maybe if I can try to get them to see things a little bit differently, that might be enough that in this theory, if we just change that one parameter, all of a sudden now it'll predict a completely different outcome, such as leaving the relationship. Okay? You can also use it, and I'll get to it when we start discussing about it, of trying to also change that friend that's annoying as hell and is way too picky. Does that make sense? Who always ruins good relationships because they're way too picky, and trying to change them around and say, dude, you're 30 years old. It's not getting any better. Okay? I speak out of personal experience, and one of my friends, which I will use as an example here, of a little bit of a leeway. He actually one time, broke up with somebody, and the main explanation he could give me, because we're like, why? She seemed awesome. Her nostrils flared funny when she laughed. Yeah. Yes. That bad, okay? So we'll talk about that, and we can use it to understand why people stay and why people leave relationships, okay? But before we jump into that, I want to give you back your exams. I understand not every student is here, so I'm just going to start reading off names and just put your hand up high. Okay, Zara? There you are. Kurt, are you here? Yep. I should just... Days after exam, well, it doesn't work now. I should just make you guys sit alphabetically days after exams. Okay, Kurt, Anthony... Bo, Darren, Anna, Dee Dee. I thought I saw you here. There you are. Jordan. There you are. Michelle. Andra. Anastasia, there you are. Bernicia. Yvonne. All the way on the other side of the room. Gonna need to stop and take a breather here halfway through. Victor. Wing. Of course. Maurice, I'm just making laps right now. Jennifer, no. Brittany, no, not the other Brittany. Sorry. Victoria with a C. Sean, nope. Evie, there you are. Victoria with a K. Nope, she's not here. Kaylin. Shandis. Kim. Shandis. Shandis and then Shannon. And then Brittany. The other Brittany with an A, not an E. And Nick. And Chaya. Sorry. Kaya, son of a... I knew I was saying it wrong, you know? That's why I screwed it up to begin with. Cody. Pino, I don't see Pino. Daniel. Amelia. Heidi. There you are. Camille. Give me a second, Heidi. I'm just going to hit up those that I know over here. Charmaine. Yep. And now Heidi. Okay. Exams back. To give you an idea on this exam, I was a little surprised the multiple choice was hard. on this exam compared to the first exam. A little surprised by that. The average grade on this exam was just shy of a 76. Okay? The high grade was a 95. Okay? Now, if you looked online, how many of you already looked online and saw your grades? Okay? You'll notice that the grades online are different than the exam. Okay? I went through and I looked at ones that were difficult, and I decided to give you credit for 2 questions on the exam. My reason for doing this is because one question, just because I figured it wasn't quite fair to ask you of this, okay? One question was number 8. It was a really difficult question. It was discriminating well. That is, the people who performed best on the exam were more likely to get it accurate than those that performed worst on the exam. But I understand the way it's questioned is you might sit there and say, well, why not do both if you can? Right? And so I get that as I was reading it and said, okay, maybe it's just not written in a way that says which one is more important, right? I mean, because if you can make really strong arguments and get a really credible promoter, then why not do both and kind of do the shotgun approach and cover all bases? And I can see how that's could be interpreted that way. Okay? The point of the question was to sit there and say, to see audience relevance, right? If it's next year, you're going to be more likely to process it centrally, so then the strength of the argument is really going to matter a lot. That was the idea. And since you're processing it centrally, how credible the promoter is isn't really going to matter much. Okay? But I get your perspective of, well, some people are going to process centrally, some aren't, and so why not do the shotgun approach and hit everybody? So that's why, although the correct answer is B, I can understand how many of you would pick D as the other, as a viable response, so I gave you credit for that one. The other one, which I think is just a simple SAT question. And what does salient mean? This is the problem, and this is why I gave you credit for that. Okay? I didn't realize that salient wasn't a common term. Okay? Salient means that you're aware of it, that it's obvious, that you know it exists. Does that make sense? That means something to be salient means that you have to be aware of. Does that make sense? So then does it make sense why social norms are going to lead to conformity if you're aware of them? Does that make sense, right? So it's one of those ones where I don't think you didn't have the knowledge. I just think you didn't have the knowledge of what that word meant. And because so many people got it wrong, I figured it wasn't fair of me to expect you to know the meaning of that word. Does that make sense? So I gave that one to you as well. Okay? A couple other things. I'll go through the essays very quickly with you right now. If you have specific questions, come to office hours. Okay? First essay on insufficient justification. The key thing here is this. And I'm going to give you a short version of what I'm looking for. Okay? Cognitive dissonance arises when we perform attitude discrepant behaviors. Right? And that cognitive dissonance is just that negative feeling that arises. When we have that negative feeling, we try to find a way to explain it away by justifying the behavior. Right? If we have insufficient justification, we can't justify that behavior, so therefore that means we're more likely to change our attitude to reduce the cognitive dissonance. Does that make sense? So that's what it is. Some of you wrote insufficient justification is cognitive dissonance, and no, it's not. We experience cognitive dissonance when we behave in a way that's inconsistent with what we think or what we feel. Right? That produces that cognitive dissonance, that general uneasiness. Okay? Now we try to reduce that uneasiness, and since we can't change our behavior, we try to justify the behavior. If I have insufficient justification, I still can't justify the behavior, so therefore the only way to reduce the cognition or to reduce the cognitive dissonance is to either ignore everything, try to ignore it, or change my attitude. Does that make sense? right? So that's what I was looking for with that there and explaining that relationship. Second one, on normative social influence. The big issue here was that many of you wrote normative social influence is changing your behavior in response to whatever. Is normative social influence changing your behavior? If I change my behavior because I fear the consequences of appearing deviant, is that normative social influence? No, what is that? If I change my behavior because I fear the consequences of appearing deviant, what is that? Is that private? Public conformity, right? The change of behavior is conformity. All right? So normative social influence is not the change of behavior. Normative social influence is that fear of appearing deviant. The fear of standing out from the group, from going against the group norms. That's the normative social influence. And it results in public conformity. Does that make sense? But it is not that. Same thing with informational social influence. Informational social influence is the perception that I don't know, the group probably knows better than I do. Does that make sense? That can lead to private conformity. But it is not the changing of your beliefs based upon the group. Does that make sense? Okay? Many of you wrote it was the change. And that's not it. The change is conformity. This normative and informational social influence is what leads to the change. Okay? The vast majority of you, though, nailed it, saying that Sharif's is more of an example of informational influence, and Ash's is more of an example of normative. Okay? But I want to clarify that. Lastly, what was the last one? Fear appeals. Okay? Key thing with fear appeals. There's basically 4 things I was looking for in fear appeals. 1, tell me what they are. Many of you didn't bother to tell me what fear appeals were. Or you said fear appeals are scare tactics. Okay? What are scare tactics? There are message that's intended to encourage somebody not to do something. That's what a fear appeal is. It's a message that's encouraging somebody to not do something by presenting them the consequences if they do it. Does that make sense? That's what a fear appeal is. It's the first thing I'm looking for. Then, what makes a fear appeal effective? There's 3 things. You need to make the consequences severe, but what? Not over-exaggerated. Okay? You need to make it relevant to the audience. And then what's the last thing that you need to provide? Exactly. A specific, obtainable way to avoid the consequence. That's it. If you described what fear appeals are and presented those 3 things, that's a 15-point response. Does that make sense? Okay? So that's what I'm looking for there on that, to give you an idea. You'll see there if I say, yeah, but what are fear appeals? Read your response, and you're going to see, I didn't really describe what fear appeals are. Right? So that's why you didn't get the points there on that. Okay? If you have specific questions, come see me during office hours. Now, since it kind of flows in perfectly onto this discussion of my availability, just to give you an idea, I am out of town after Wednesday's class for the remainder of the week at a conference. Okay, so I will not be accessible Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I come back Sunday evening. Okay, so if you try to contact me through email, I am not ignoring you. I am just inaccessible while I'm away. Okay? Yes. Not all of them will be graded by then. I am working right now to get assignment number 1 finished. I had planned on getting it finished this morning, but I had a lot of students stop by during office hours, and I don't post assignment grades until I have everybody's grades done. Does that make sense? Okay. As soon as I can. Okay? That's the best that I can say. Like I said, I was hoping to have it done this morning, but I had a lot of students come by from my other class during office hours, and that prevented me from getting it done. Okay? Assignment 2 will not be graded before I go. I'll tell you that straight up. There's no way assignment 2 will be graded before I leave town on Wednesday. Not going to happen. Okay? Any other questions? No? Okay. Let's talk about some fun stuff. Let's talk about love. Where am I looking? Okay, we'll start here. You guys seem bitter. Okay? Just realize with the exam now, just to put it in context, with those 4 points added in, the highest score on the exam was now a 99. There were 9 or 10 students that had A's on the exam, and that made the class average just shy, like we're talking like a 1/10 of a percentage point shy of an 80 on the exam. So that's pretty good. All right? So, and if you look, many of you showed marked improvement from the first exam to the second, with the exception of those that performed really well on the first exam and didn't perform as well on the second exam. And what do we call that from a statistical sense? Wow. How many of you have taken stats? You're in stats right now? You guys remember a concept called regression to the mean? No? Okay, regression to the mean is an important concept, and it relates to social psychology, so let me explain it here, okay? Regression to the mean is that if somebody performs ridiculously well on something, the next time they perform it, they're likely not to perform as well, not because their ability has changed, but because if you perform really well one time, you're more likely to regress to the mean the next time, right? You have an average ability, and sometimes you might go beyond that average ability. I'm not saying you are average. I'm saying every person has an average ability for that person. Does that make sense? Right? And sometimes I may go really exceed beyond that. And then the next time I perform it, I may perform worse. It doesn't mean I'm performing poorly. It just means that I'm regressing towards my mean. Right? The best example I can say from a social psych perspective often comes up in sports. All right? And actually not even in sports. Let's look at it in the sense of well, it is sports, but it's also sports and video games. Right? You guys ever hear of the Madden curse? What's the Madden curse? Either injured or not performing well the following season. Okay, Madden football is a video game, right? And it's like the epitome of like franchise football video games. It's been around since the early 90s on the old N64 and Sega Genesis, right? Okay? Like that's how long ago it's been. And every season they put on an athlete, a football player, on the cover, right? And it's considered, initially it was considered an honor to be on the cover of Madden because it was like you were really, really stinking good that year. Does that make sense? But what they tended to find was, oh, now the season afterwards, the player didn't perform that well, or maybe the player got injured, and everybody started to say there's a curse to being on the cover of Madden. It's not a curse. It's simple regression to the mean. If I perform really, really well, odds are I'm going to perform less well the following year because I'm just going to regress to the mean. Does that make sense? It's also why you will hear in athletics across the board something called the sophomore slump. That you have like this rookie who comes out of the box, lighting it up really well, the next year they don't perform nearly as well. Simple regression to the mean. That's it. It's not anything anomalous. It's not anything curse or anything like that. It's simple statistics. It's partially that, yeah, regression to the mean on that. There's also a little bit more with that when you start dealing with team sports and that you have salary cap issues. You have players that end up going for more money because they perform well and so on. So that does affect it there as well, right? But that's something that you will see coming up. So if you got like a 99 in the first exam and you only got a 90 on this exam, it doesn't mean that you did more poorly. It could just mean normal regression to the mean. Does that make sense? That also explains it the other way. If you did really poorly on the first exam and you showed improvement, it's not necessarily that you studied harder. It's just regression to the mean. And that anybody at the extremes, next time you take the exam are more likely to be closer to the mean. Does that make sense? That's just normal statistics. Okay? What's that? It's what your mean, not the class mean. It's your mean. So people who have, if you are, I'm dating myself here, but you guys know the movie Billy Madison? Yeah. Okay. If for some reason you went back to elementary school, I fully expect that you're going to get A's on every exam. Does that make sense, right? Okay. Because your ability is much better than that. Does that make sense? But in a class like this where it's kind of tailored towards this level of intellect across everybody, right? There's going to be times that you perform well, times you don't perform well, but it's all going to average out at the end of the quarter. Okay? All right. That also gets to a related topic, which again is a social psych topic of, you guys ever hear of somebody having the hot hand? Right? What is that? Good luck streak, right? So, and what do you say when somebody has the hot hand? Give him the ball, get out of his way, let him shoot, right? Looked at a lot with basketball players, right? You find somebody like, I don't know, who do you guys like? LeBron? You guys like LeBron? You're not from Cleveland, are you? Okay. All right. Imagine LeBron goes on a tear and he hits 10 shots in a row. You sit there and you say, give him the ball. He's on fire. Right? You want to know what the reality is? LeBron is no more likely to make that 11th shot after hitting 10 in a row than he is if he had missed 10 shots in a row. The myth of the hot hand is exactly that. It's a myth. Statistically speaking, you're more likely to perform at your average. Okay? So if you're an average free throw shooter, say let's use free throws, you're an average 80% free throw shooter, just because you hit 8 in a row does not mean that you're going to miss the next 2. Does that make sense? Well, no, but he's not an average 80% free throw shooter, okay? That's what I'm saying. You're going to perform at your average. And every shot after, the previous shots have no influence on how you can perform from this shot or any shot forward. And it's been shown. They've looked at people who announcers have said, oh, they're hot, give them the ball, and they've actually statistically analyzed and determined they are no more likely to make that next shot than they were beforehand. But we perceive that they are, right? And this is where social psych comes into play, right? We think that people have hot hands. They can go on hot streaks, right? This happens a lot with gamblers, right? Gamblers sit there and say, a good example of this is, okay, I'm playing roulette and it's come up black 5 times in a row. I'm betting everything I have on red. You guys know roulette? Okay, I'm betting everything I have on red. Why? Because it's got to be red. There's been 5 in a row of black. It has to be red the next time. Does that make sense? Right? Because it's 50-50, whether it's, well, not quite 50-50. There's the zeros on there, but it's pretty much 50-50. It's going to come up red or black. If it comes up black 5 times in a row, it's got to be red next time. So they put all their money on red, and what happens? Half the time they lose because it's still 50-50 every stinking time. It doesn't matter. Does that make sense? All right, anyway. Okay, let's go back to attraction. Last class we talked about initial attraction. What gets us to like people. But now let's talk about developing that attraction a little bit more. Beyond that physical attraction, what makes me want to get into a relationship with people? Okay? So let me ask you this. In romantic relationships, not friendships, not business relationships, in romantic relationships, is Paula Abdul correct? You guys have no idea what I'm talking about, some of you. Okay? Do opposites attract? No? You don't think so? No? True or false? How many say true? Opposites attract. It's the whole yin and yang thing. How many say false? Those that haven't picked something, you must pick something. True? False? The answer is 3 of you. Thank you. False. Opposites do not attract. Now, I'm sure you all have anecdotal evidence that would argue with this. Okay? Like my aunt, who is a I'm not a small person. I don't come from small stock, let me put it that way. My aunt is not a small person. She's like probably 6 foot, 250, played linebacker. You know, like she's a large woman, right? Okay, blonde hair, pale skin, all that stuff, right? She's married to like a 5'3" black guy. Okay, like he's in 5'3" I might be over exaggerating it. Okay, but he's short. Okay, I mean, first time I met him, I was like 12 and I was taller than him. Okay, like this guy is tiny. All right, so you sit there and you say, well, I see that opposites attract, right? Not so fast. Okay, the research suggests that opposites do not attract. Okay, and why is that? Why don't opposites attract? Because we like people like us. I'm cool. You're like me, that must mean you're cool, right? And we find that in romantic relationships too, not just friendships. We like people who are similar to us, okay? We like to associate ourselves with people that are similar to us. We like people that have similar attitudes to us. But the question that arises, we know that. That's not surprising. I think we talked about that earlier in the quarter, okay? But the question is, are we kind of automatically attracted to people that are similar to us? What do you think I mean by automatically attracted? Excuse me. Can you say that again, Renisha? Well, yeah, that's what I mean by attracted, okay? But what do I mean by automatically? Instantaneous. It's implicit. By implicit, you mean what? Yeah, okay. By automatic, let's think of, am I kind of drawn to this person without conscious awareness? Does that make sense? That's the question that I have for you, okay? We know that we like similar people, but is this attraction to similar people kind of automatic? Are we automatically attracted to people that are similar to us? Or does it require some sort of deliberative cognitive assessment? What do you guys think? How many say automatic? I know at least one person says cognitive, that requires some sort of deliberative cognitive assessment. How many say it requires some sort of decision or at least thought? Okay? What we tend to know from this is that being attracted to similar people actually requires cognitive effort. Okay? So similarity doesn't spark attraction. All right? And this is an interesting thing, okay? We're not kind of just automatically attracted to people that are similar to us. All right? But we are kind of automatically repulsed by people that are dissimilar to us. Okay? And I don't want to say repulsed. I know it has like that negative connotation to it. Okay? Don't keep that negative baggage with the word. Okay? Just say it in the sense of dissimilarity triggers avoidance. Does that make sense? That's what we mean by repulsion, a desire to avoid someone. And it's not that it's a desire to avoid someone because we have negative feelings towards them. It's not a prejudice issue. Does that make sense? It's not that having a negative feeling towards somebody because of their being part of an out-group. Okay? It's more just a desire to avoid them. Okay? And an example we can think of with this, all right, is how many of you came to like an orientation day here? So the majority of you came to an orientation day here. Good. This might work. Okay? And when you walked into that room, how many of you came to orientation with somebody? Like somebody was coming in, you knew that person already, and you kind of came in together. Okay? I don't mean like you came like with your parents or your spouse. I mean like came in with like another student. Right? Like so like you and your friend are coming at the same time and you both kind of show up to orientation at the same time. Just a couple of you, okay? So this might not work for you that had that experience, okay? But let's think about those of you that were kind of individuals and didn't know other people in the incoming class at the time, okay? When you first walked into the room, what did you do? I know that you probably like walked up to a table and you got got, the whatever it is, the packets and then kind of all that stuff. But at some point there, before the orientation began, there was like a social environment, right, where you didn't know people, right? And you're killing time waiting for the assembly to begin or whatever it is. I haven't been to the orientation here, so I don't know the process of it, okay? Right? But you're killing time waiting for it to begin. Maybe you're going and grabbing some grub, right? But what are you doing as far as social interactions at that point in time? So you're not having social interactions? You just kind of grab a seat? Okay, so you might talk with somebody that's sitting next to you. Okay? But when you walk in, are you surveying the room at all? Are you looking around the room? And what's your reaction as you're looking around the room? Where to sit? Where the food is? Coffee. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. But what about as far as social perception and looking at other people? Are you aware of the other people around you? What's that? Okay, so where do you want to present yourself in the room? Did any of you decide on a place to sit by looking to see who else is sitting around that area? Some of you may have, others may not have. Okay, so some of you may have done that. Any of you walk up and just start talking to a group? See a couple people hanging out there and just kind of walked up and started talking to them? Yeah, a couple of you did. Who did you walk up and talk with? Okay, well, why did you pick the people that you picked? I guess do you remember? You just walked up, you're by yourself, and you just saw people, and you said, all right, I'm going to go talk to that person. Right? You didn't survey the room at all and say, I'm going to go talk to that person, not that person. So it's just pure proximity effect. Okay? All right? What we tend to know, though, and what makes this a little bit difficult for you to express this, is that there's an automatic filter that happens without conscious awareness. Now, sometimes it can happen with conscious awareness, but it can be automatic in that we survey the environment quickly. In those that are different from us, we kind of automatically exclude. It doesn't require us to say, oh, they're different, I don't want to talk with them. We just kind of do it automatically. Does that make sense? So you may not even notice their presence. You may not even notice that you are excluding that group. Does that make sense? We just kind of automatically exclude them. And this leads to what we call a two-factor or a two-stage model of attraction, in which we get into a social environment, and there's a whole bunch of people in that environment, like in that orientation. Let's say that, I don't know, how many students? Maybe 50? Oh, more than that? Yeah, I don't know what 200? 4,000? There's a lot of food, so, all right, let's say that there's 100 students. Let's say that there's 100. We'll keep it an easy number, okay? Let's say there's 100. We look at that group of 100, and we kind of initially apply an automatic filter of dissimilarity, where individuals that are dissimilar, we just tend to avoid immediately. Does that make sense? And we avoid them, and we don't give it any thought. It just kind of happens. Maybe it's easier to think of in high school, okay? Because in high school, there's a lot more cliques than there are in college, right? And in high school, the cliques are kind of readily identifiable by appearance, right? I mean, just think of a bad teenage movie, right? Okay? You got the skaters in one area. Which are there still skaters in high school? Are they kind of like their own clique? Yeah? I don't know. You got to remember, I'm a product of early 90s high school, like where skaters were like a clique, okay? All right? You got your skaters in one area. Nowadays, actually, I shouldn't even say nowadays. Like, are there still goth kids in high school? Emos? Right? Okay. All right. So you got like the goth emo kids. You have the cheerleaders, the jocks, the chess club, all of that stuff, right? And say you walk into a cafeteria in high school, right? You see the skaters. You kind of just, if you're not a skater or the emo kids or whatever, you just kind of immediately ignore them, right? You don't pay much more attention to them. Just, no, they're not similar to me. I'm done with them. Does that kind of make sense? Right? That's that first stage. It's automatic. And then what you're left with is everybody else. Does that make sense? This is the two-stage. First stage is this automatic dissimilarity screen. Okay? People who are dissimilar to us, we kind of automatically exclude. We avoid them. But now we're left with a bunch of other people. Let's say that in our example of 100 students, 20 of them you quickly said are dissimilar to me, for whatever reason. Right? You're left with 80 students who, doesn't mean that they're similar, it just means they're not dissimilar. Does that make sense? And then we come to the next phase, which is this positive screen of similarity, which is an effortful process. Which now I look at this group of 80, and I say, okay, who amongst this group looks similar to me? Does that make sense? Who do I want to avoid? And if I say these certain individuals are of low similarity, I just become indifferent to them. I don't avoid them. I don't approach them. I'm just indifferent. But those that are left over, I become attracted to. And then I pursue continued contact with those individuals. Does that make sense? So think back to your orientation day. Right? If you approached people, okay? Did you approach people who you would argue are really dissimilar to you? Did anybody approach people who you would argue are extremely dissimilar to you? No? No hands up. Did you approach people that you thought were similar to you in one way or another? I'm seeing heads nod. Okay. Does that kind of support the theory a little bit? Right? None of you said that you approached dissimilar people. Right? But were you actively avoiding, were you consciously avoiding dissimilar people? No? It wasn't like you sat there and looked at them and said, no, they're dissimilar, I don't want to go up to them? No? Or were you looking at people and saying, they look like somebody I may want to talk with? And then you approach that person? That supports this model, right? You don't even notice the fact that you're avoiding dissimilar people because it's automatic. And then of everybody who's left over, I'm evaluating those people to determine, are they similar enough for me to want to make contact with? Does that make sense? Right? Yes?
The negative screen, is that more peripheral, more superficial then? Or is that
It can be.
upon an interaction?
Well, no, remember, this is initial attraction. This isn't based upon interactions with people. This is that initial approach. Yeah, this is just trying to decide, are they similar or dissimilar, based upon a variety of things. It could be physical attractiveness. It could be, I can perceive group membership from appearance. Does that make sense? That type of thing. Or I might just assume, knowing that this is I'm trying to think of an example. I might assume, knowing that this is only thing I can think of which popped in my head is a May Day rally. Okay, does that make sense? And I can assume everybody here is probably an anarchist. I'm not an anarchist, so I'm just not even going to, it doesn't have to be perceptual. It can be based upon my assumption of the group of people as well going into it. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Matching hypothesis. This is a good one. I like this one. Okay? Another thing that predicts attraction is the matching hypothesis. Do you guys know what this is? So we like people that are similar to us. We like people that are so similar to us that what? Not even just matching our interests, but what? Match what we look like. Okay? The matching hypothesis proposes that we become romantically involved with others who are actually equivalent to us in physical attractiveness. Right? That's what this proposes. And let's think about it anecdotally. Right? If somebody is in a relationship in which they're not matched, what do we say? How the hell, she's out of his league. Right? Does that make sense? And so we sit there and we say, he must be rich. Right? But we tend to notice, and it sticks out in our mind, when there's not a match in a relationship, right? We look at it and we say, what? Huh? Right? One of the more famous examples from, and this is before your time, is Lyle Lovett and Julia Roberts. You guys remember that? Okay. They were married for a while. More recently, Angelina Jolie and Billy Bob Thornton. Right? Sitting there saying, what the hell is she doing with Bad Santa? Right? Because the truth is, that guy's like that in real time, right? He wasn't acting for that movie, okay? They just followed him around and they said, wait, we have a movie here, okay? Right? So you sit there and say, they don't match, right? And it's so pervasive that we notice it. But what do you think? Is it true? Does it actually predict the outcome of a relationship? Are relationships in which the partners are matched on attractiveness? I'm not saying they look alike, okay? But I'm saying if he's a 7, she's a 7, does that make sense? Okay, right? On relationships in which they're matched, are those relationships more likely to succeed than those in which there's a difference? There's a 2-point spread, okay? How many say, yes, relationships that are matched are more likely to succeed? How many say, no, it doesn't matter? How many say within reason, as long as you're within plus minus 2 points, you're okay? Okay? What the research really tends to show is that the best relationships are those that the partners are matched in attractiveness. Right? Yes?
What happens if the person is extremely attractive but they think that the sex is going to walk into the room?
Well,
Of their own attraction and being equal to that. Like if you said a girl's, a 10 and a guy who's a 4, he thinks he's a 10.
but would the 10 go with the 4? If I think that I'm a 10 and I'm only a 4, am I even going to get with the 4 to begin with? Not necessarily, right? So the relationship isn't going to succeed because it's never going to start. Does that make sense? These are, once you get into a relationship, right, the relationships in which you're matched are more likely to succeed, right? So imagine somebody who's a 5 that lands a 9, right? Donald Trump, okay. Well, maybe, maybe not. Let's look at it, okay? How many times has Donald Trump been married? Right? Okay. You look at actors and actresses, people that are wealthy, right? Now, granted, a lot of marriages fail. What percentage? Maybe about 50%, right? Okay. Actually, I think it is a little bit higher than 50%. So, if you want to get married, before you pop the question, just flip a coin and determine if it's going to work out or not, okay? Right? But we know this, okay? We know that initially in a relationship, we always want somebody that's better than we are. Does that make sense? If I'm a 5, I want a 7 or higher. Does that make sense? Right? We're always attracted to people that are better looking. Well, not always attracted to people, but we kind of always our ideal relationship is somebody that's a little bit better than we are. But the reality is, the longer the relationship goes, the ones that are more likely to stay together are those in which people are evenly matched. Why do you think that's the case? What do you mean by jealousy and security? What do you mean by that?
Someone's 4 points higher than you, then, you're always concerned that it'll disappear.
Sorry, there was a guy that was deciding to peer in through the back window at the classroom, so I was waving to him. I realized you might have been wondering what the hell's going on, okay? He's still hanging out there watching us now, okay? All right? He keeps walking by and looking in and scoping us out, okay? All right? But, okay, so jealousy, right? All right, so that's part of it, right? If I'm dating somebody who is better than I am, or who I perceive to be better than I am, more attractive than I am, I'm constantly on the lookout for what? Them being attracted to other people, and also what? More attractive people being attracted to them and swooping in and stealing, right? Does that make sense? So that produces jealousy, insecurity. And are those good things to have in a relationship? No. Now imagine that you're on the other end of it. Imagine that you're the more attractive person in the relationship. How are you going to perceive? How are you going to perceive that, right? You sit there and all of a sudden you're the 7 and you're dating the 4. What's going to happen? You might start to think you're better than them. You might look for the grass to be greener. You might have friends that let you know that she's not a 10, she's actually a 4, and you're like, huh? Right? Are you kidding me? Right? Then all of a sudden, you have the goggles come off and you realize, damn, I can do better, right? Okay. That's the thing. We tend to think that we always want somebody to help us get a little bit higher up that notch, to win somebody a little bit better than us. But the reality is, the best relationships are those in which we're evenly matched, right? Going to show that similarity is so important that it's not even just similarity in attitudes and beliefs, but it's similarity even in degree of physical attractiveness. Does that make sense? Right? And like I mentioned, relationships in which there is a large discrepancy are less likely to succeed. That's why Angelina Jolie and Billy Bob Thornton, you'd predict that dropping. Lyle Lovett and Julia Roberts, you predict that failing. What are other ones? Seal and Heidi Klum. Okay. Anything else? Can you think of any other examples? Give me some that are more current. Does Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez fit in that category? Are they matched on looks? Okay. Okay. Any other ones that fall in that category? No? Lady Gaga and the guy from where? Chicago Fire? Oh, okay, so he's really attractive and she's not? I don't know. Chicago Fire is a TV show? Okay. Do you know the guy's name? Okay. Any other ones? Yeah. Jay-Z and Beyonce? Is that a good one? Is Jay-Z unattractive? Oh, is he really? Is Jay-Z unattractive? Really? And I'm not saying I don't know what Jay-Z looks like. I just never thought Jay-Z was, never thought that he was extremely attractive, but I didn't. So Jay-Z's like, Beyonce's like, damn, right? Okay. Okay, so that's one that, so would you predict then that relationship is not likely to work out in the long run? Yeah, well, it's not necessarily long run. They've only been together for like 3 years, right? 10 years? Damn, I should know better than that, okay? So maybe that's one that defies it, okay? But think about that as you're going through it. Think about the relationship that you're in. Are any of you in a relationship in which you are either, you moved up the ladder or you're, pulled somebody up from the minor leagues, right? Okay? Right? Think about that in your relationship. And actually, I don't want to scratch that. I do not want you thinking about that in your relationship because I do not want you to come back and blame me for your relationship going sour, okay? But I can think about that in the past relationships that I had where we just weren't matched, right? There was just no way that she was in my league, okay? Right? We just weren't matched at all, all right? Okay. Well, my question to you then is, we see similarity matters in that initial attraction, right? That similarity can predict, physical similarity can predict long-term effectiveness or the long-term relationship, how long that relationship lasts. But is there any truth does Paula Abdul have any truth to her song? Do opposites attract? Is there any truth to that? So you think complementing matters. It's not that they're opposite. It means that they complement one another. So maybe short term it could. What about like building a relationship? Okay. So you can have differences, but you have to be similar in some way. So you need to be more similar than different? Yeah? So you think complementing matters. It's not necessarily opposites, but it's that they have something that you don't have, and that matters? Yeah.
But I think when you come to foundational, religious beliefs, financial beliefs, how you, want to raise children, the big things in a relationship, if you don't have a decent similarity in there, it will never last long term. Like if you were looking at something liberal like music or somebody's, educational level, something that you bring to the table that other person doesn't have, then that would be attractive. But if you differ fundamentally, you're bound to not work out.
What do you guys think? You agree with that? So you think similarity is necessary on core issues, let's call them core issues, but then we prefer on the peripheral issues complementary things? Yeah, you think so? What do you guys, you agree with that? Think that that's true in relationships you've had in the past? Yeah? Well, research has been done there, okay, to see if this complementarity hypothesis holds any water, okay? That do people seek others whose needs oppose their own, okay? And what that research pretty much finds is that complementarity does not influence attraction. Doesn't influence at all. Remember, we're talking here about initial attraction, okay? Now, complementarity might help in when we develop a relationship and keeping that relationship going. We'll talk about that a little bit later, right? Does that make sense? Right? But initial attraction is all about similarity. Now, it's not what I believe is important in similarity. Does that make sense? It's what that person believes is important. That's why for my aunt, similarity to her that was important wasn't ethnicity, height. Does that make sense? Right? That didn't matter to her. There was other things that was similar with that individual, as you're kind of getting at, those core things. Does that make sense? And that was more important, and that's what bred the attractiveness, or the attraction, I should say. Does that make sense? Right? So that's what we're looking at here, is that we don't see that opposites attract. Complementarity can help relationships after they're developed, but it doesn't lead to the attraction of the relationship. Does that make sense? Really, it's all about similarity. And it's not what I think looking at you, at your relationship, how similar you are. It's about me looking at that person I'm attracted to and what I think we have in common and what's important to me as far as similarity goes. Does that make sense? Right? And so there's a variety of things, right? For some people, education level might matter a whole lot. Right? You might want somebody who's matched with you in intelligence. Okay? For others, maybe it's religious beliefs that breed the attraction. Right? For others, maybe it's really focused on physical attractiveness or music. Right? Does that make sense? What's important for one person is not important for the other person. Right? Does that kind of make sense there? Okay? To give you an example of this, for my wife and I, when we first met, my wife and I don't share educational backgrounds at all. You guys have more of an education than my wife has. My wife didn't go to college. She's a professional now, but when we met, it didn't matter to me. I didn't care about educational background. We had similar taste in music, right, which is good, okay, right? And, well, she was hot, okay? I mean, that's basically what it boiled down to. Damn, and oh, you like that music too? Okay, let's go, all right? But that's basically what it boiled down to. It wasn't education level. It wasn't these other things. It was really simple. But for other people, education matters a whole lot, right? Does that make sense? Many professors have their spouse is what? A professor as well, right? Or has some sort of advanced degree, because that's what seems to be important to some individuals, right? Let's move on from this, okay? A couple other things that matter in first encounters, okay? What can you imagine this slide is going to be about? What else predicts whether we're attracted to somebody? Exactly. Okay? Not only does it matter how much we have in common, but we like relationships that are psychologically balanced, which means I like relationships in which they like me. Does that seem kind of obvious? Right? But think back to this. Have you ever gone out with somebody simply because you found out that they liked you? Right? Beforehand, you never really thought of them that way. Right? But then all of a sudden you find out, oh, they're interested in me? You know, they're not that bad. Right? Yeah, okay, I'll go out with you. Okay, right? You weren't really attracted to them until you found out what? That they were attracted to you. And then you're like, you know, Marvin Gaye, let's get it on, okay? Right? And that seems kind of obvious, but, you know, we have to think about it for a second and realize it's all still about liking people that are similar to us. Right? I mean, it all comes back to attraction is about similarity. You like me, so therefore I might like you. Right? Does that make sense? Here's a good one, too. Let's ask you about this one. All right? How many of you have ever played hard to get? Don't lie about it. Come on. We're in an open environment here. How many of you ever played hard to get? All right? Guys, any guys ever play hard to get? I have, especially if I knew beforehand that they were attracted to me. Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Right? Okay. Is it good to play hard to get? Does playing hard to get, so playing hard to get usually means that you are attracted to that person. Does that make sense, right? And at least I'm not talking about playing games with somebody and using somebody. I'm saying playing hard to get. So what do we mean by playing hard to get? Making them chase you, but you are attracted to that person, right? Okay, does that make sense, right? It's not like you're using somebody or playing games with that person. So the end goal of playing hard to get is what? To get the person and also to make them even more attracted to you, right? Does that make sense? To try to get them to want you even more, right? Does it work? Does playing hard to get make you more attractive to the other person? In the movies? Like what? What's the most famous, 10 Things I Hate About You. I guess that kind of works, right? Reese Witherspoon and her husband in real life? Cruel Intentions? Yeah, that movie's just... If my memory of that is what it is, there's just a lot there. Well, what's one of the more famous examples of people being hard to get? Literary examples. Pride and Prejudice works. What's the other one? They made Great Expectations. Right? Right, that's another example of it, literary. Right, they made a horrible movie out of it with Ethan Hawke and Uma Thurman. Okay. Another example of it that's hard to get in a different way, Romeo and Juliet. Right? Okay. But you say it depends. Right? It depends on what? Okay. Anybody ever been played by somebody who was playing hard to get? Right? I have too. Okay? Right? What was your reaction to that? If they were initially playing hard to get, that made what? It made it more exciting, made it more challenging, right? Until at some time that what happens? It gets irritating, and you do what? You just give up, you walk away, right? And that's basically what we find with this, okay? Playing hard to get works to a certain extent, okay? Now, the first thing is, right, do you want somebody that's at least a little bit hard to get? Yeah, okay? That's the first thing that we want to say, okay? We want people that are at least, to use the psychological term, moderately selective. Okay? We want people who are moderately selective. Okay? We don't want somebody who's just like, cool, sounds good. All right? This is saying... Then I encourage you to do this, and I know that this is stereotyping, okay? I went to grad school in Indiana. When I moved to Indiana, I have never seen a place that is so sexually open. And I come from New York. I moved there. I could not believe just how open everybody was with sex in Indiana. Now, granted, most of my contact was I worked at a bar, so I was exposed to a certain type of student. I couldn't believe it. Just the fact of somebody would meet somebody and say, hey, you want to go back to my place? And it wasn't, have a couple drinks. Okay, it was, this same person who I found out was not very selective at all, one of the first times she met me, she comes up, starts flirting with me and everything like that. I say, this is my wife. I'm sitting at the bar. I say, this is my wife. She's like, oh, hi, how are you? And then she keeps talking with me and doing this. And I'm like, is it too loud in here? Did she not understand me? Right? But she wasn't selective at all. Doesn't really make her that attractive. Does that make sense? We want people who are moderately selective, but not too hard. Right? If you make it too difficult, what happens to us? We feel rejected. And do we like to feel rejected? No. So we're going to move on. We're going to give up. Does that make sense? You want to play a little bit, but not too much. Okay? But let's ask this question then. If it's in their control, if it's in your control to be hard to get, you should be moderately selective. Right? Don't just be giving it out like candy on Halloween. Okay? But don't make it too difficult. But what happens if it's not in your control? How then are you perceived by other people? Let me ask it to you this way. Okay? Imagine what's going to happen in 15 years when no, she's 3 now, so let's call it 14 years. My daughter's 17. Okay? A couple of guys come over to my house. They want to go out with my daughter. Oh, yeah, exactly. Okay, right, okay. And I block it. I say, ain't going to happen. Right? What do you think that effect is going to have on those guys? They're going to want it that much more. Right? When the reason the person is hard to get is not due to their personal decision, but is due to an external reason, right? That makes them more attractive due to something called psychological reactance. And what do I mean by this? What's psychological reactance? Let's think of what is reactance. You react to something, right? Psychological would suggest that it's what? Something that you perceive, but also would suggest that it's internal, right? So it's an internal reaction to something. If I tell you you can't have it, what's psychological reaction? I want it even more. Does that make sense? And why do you want it even more? Because you're taking away my free will. How many people gave a damn about having a gun until the government came out after Newtown and said, we want to restrict access to certain guns? And did a lot more people now say, hey, wait, I want one, I want one, I want one? And what happened after that? What happened the weeks after Newtown? Gun sales skyrocketed. Right? Now, part of it could be a perception that I need to protect myself more. But part of it is likely driven by the psychological reactions of, you tell me I can't have something, I want it even more. Does that make sense? And that's what we're talking about here, okay? We want to do what we want to do. And if you tell me I can't do it, I'm going to fight for it even more. I want it even more. Right? Romeo and Juliet. Okay? It's probably, well, it's fictitious so I can say this. It's probably a good thing that they killed themselves. Right? And I mean in the sense of, what happens if the Capulets and the Montagues sat there and said, you know what, we're cool. And Romeo would be like, you know, Juliet's not that, she's not that good, right? This is the grass is greener effect, right? How many times you see somebody like not saying from your personal experience, right? But you've heard of situations in which somebody, like maybe somebody's having an affair, right? And they're married, and they're passionate because they're with the what's that? Oh, what's the term? Mistress. Thank you. Okay, they're passionate with the mistress, but all of a sudden they get a divorce, and what happens? It fizzles out, right? The mistress is no longer attractive to the cheater, and the cheater is no longer attracted to the mistress. That relationship just fizzles out because part of it was this, it's taboo. I can't have it, right? That psychological reactance that occurs from it. Okay? And we know that when the freedom is threatened, okay, we react by desiring that threatened option a lot more. Right? Okay. let's take a break here. All right? We take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about mate selection, move into theories of relationships, and we'll get through what we get through. Yes. Honestly, that would be it, because like I said, that Friday I will not be here because my son has surgery. And then that Monday is when the final is scheduled, right?
Yeah.
So you're not going to be around on that. So the only possible day to take it, to be honest, would be that Thursday, and it would have to be that Thursday at sometime before noon.
I can do that.
Okay?
I will make sure I can do that.
All right, so why don't you do me this? Why don't you send me an
I
email
will. Now that I know that, I'll send you an email. We'll arrange it.
and coordinate a time, okay?
Is there a decent review site that concentrates on grad schools? Because like
That's
I have a
way
list, but,
too vague of a question.
well, like I'm getting conflicting things when I'm looking at how I'm looking at prospective job stuff afterwards from like places like Marymount, places that are on my list that I'm going to apply to,
Okay.
and I'm just getting mostly undergrad stuff from it when I go try to look
Oh,
at the reviews of
the
it.
best thing to do if you want to look to see like what careers are available in psych and with what degrees. Is that what you're asking about?
No, looking at there's complaints with places like Marymount about not getting jobs afterwards
Ah.
with that degree because of either the reputation of the school or
Yeah, that
No.
there's nothing like a Better Business Bureau type thing for schools.
because you
Okay.
like with undergrad you can just go in and look for like student review or college review and you'll get a pile of them that have ratings.
Yeah.
Classes are like this is like this is expected.
Nothing
but
for specific grad programs. The only thing that exists that looks at, success rates with degrees is more global in the sense of what do people with degrees do? You know what I'm saying? And that's
Right.
on the APA website for that,
Yeah.
APA careers, and see
And-
that.
and that
There's
is
nothing
valid.
that specifically looks at. Now you can contact those places and ask them for that,
Yeah.
right? But a lot of places generally don't put that.
Yeah.
Well, I
some
guess
of their
honestly,
websites have
it depends
Some
on
of their
places. I
websites
can sit
have
there and
data
think.
sections in there that I've seen.
Yeah, but it might not have that. I mean, one of the things that you can look at on that is some sites will have like alumni page, like, and will list kind of like where their alumni is, the year they graduated, and what their current position is. So you can kind of deduce from there what that is. But you run the risk of them being not being updated. Like I think mine still says that I'm in Florida, right? From where I earned my PhD. Generally speaking, anything that is a pay for degree is like a for-profit institution. I don't know what Marymount is, to be honest.
Marymount's Catholic. They're considered nonprofit.
So
they're attractive to me because they're right next to Alphabet City, and they have the internships with all of the,
like if you look at like University of Phoenix, those are horrible.
Yeah, no.
Okay, like things of that sort. Those are
Staying away from any
of those that are pay for Washington governors, which is a new one here in Washington. They're all horrible. They don't have any evidence of it producing quality jobs afterwards. But then once you start looking into individual accredited programs, you kind of just have to go by what the school can provide because there's nobody that keeps track of that.
Yeah, because I mean, my two top schools is WVU, which is really similar.
Excuse me. Thank you.
And then Marymount's really attractive because of where it's located and where all their internships are. They have phenomenal connections to all of the bureaus that I want to work with. So.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell you yay or nay about a specific school other than contact the school.
But I'm going to go visit both of them this summer.
Yeah, and see what you can get from there.
Summer break, I'm going to go visit WVU at Marymount.
And
go stay with a friend
see what
down
they
in
can
North
say.
Carolina.
Yeah, see what they say. Because I couldn't tell you
Yeah,
either
I was
way.
just curious because I see conflicting reviews on them. So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's come on back here. Let's talk about mates. All right, we've already kind of done some of this after our last exam. I had you guys kind of complete that personal ad activity and kind of try to identify what we see as what tends to be the preference for males and females as far as mates go, right? And think back to that. Did we identify anything? Were there any differences or similarities between the males and females in the classroom? Sense of humor was a similarity. Both wanted sense of humor in their ideal partner. Anything else?
Attractiveness on some level was, there were different descriptions of what was attractive. But
Well, is it fair to say that in any relationship we want to be attracted to the person?
yeah.
Right? I mean, because that's the first step of the relationship, right? So let's clarify what we mean by that, right? Of course, there's going to be attractiveness gets you in there, but we already looked at attractiveness can mean a lot of things. It can mean physical attractiveness, it can mean similarity, it can mean liking, right? All those things can feed into attractiveness. So then how could we parse that out a little bit more and refine that a little bit more?
Similar to us was definitely, the athletic types wanted athletic types, and the people who were into music seemed to want more people into music, and so similar.
Okay, so similarities between the men and women were sense of humor and wanting people who had shared similar interest. Okay. Any other similarities that you noticed? Was money a similarity? No? Who tended to care more about money? Women, right? Okay. Women tended to report wanting somebody who had a job or financial security or something like that than the males asked for, right? Okay. What other differences did we see? Kids. Who tended to report more kids or family issues or desires for somebody who liked kids or or was dedicated to family? Women. Okay, so women tend to report that more than male. What other things did we notice? Did males report anything as desirable more so than the females? What's that?
Outward, peripheral type of things, or more food and hobbies and.
Okay, so food, cooking, things of that sort. Okay. What about physical attractiveness? Did men report more of that? Okay. So we're finding that there were some things that they overlapped with, but some things that men tended to prefer more than women and women preferred more than men, right? And a lot of this comes from, well, one reason, we do tend to see these gender differences that emerge, right, in preferences for mates. We tend to see them, and I don't think I have it on this slide. I think I got my slides for my purpose right now a little bit out of order, right? But we do see some kind of universal differences here, right? And some of these can come from an understanding or an evolutionary perspective can explain why these differences emerge. And in according to an evolutionary perspective, what is it going to argue about mate selection?
We choose our mate based on natural selection when we breed, basically. We want the success of our children, of our genetic line.
So we choose our mate on the basis of what?
Qualities that will continue to increase survivability.
Of what? Of our offspring, okay? So we choose our mates based upon maximizing the likelihood that my genes are going to get passed on. And my genes are only going to get passed on if what? My offspring survive to the point of reaching maturation, sexual maturation, so they can then have offspring, which will then ensure that my genes survive. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the evolutionary perspective, okay? And because of that, men and women, by nature, need to differ in their optimal mating behaviors. And why is that? Well, it's not just that they both provide a different role, but how can men maximize ensuring that their genes pass on? Being with lots of women. How can women maximize their genes passing on? Being selective, but not just selective, being what? Let's think about this. How many kids can a man have?
As many as he wants.
Right? I mean, I don't want to say infinite, okay? But let's think about it. From sexual maturation, let's say around the age of what? Let's call it 13. Okay? Up until, you guys know Steve Martin? Just had a kid. Steve Martin's like 69 years old and just had a kid. Okay? Yeah, okay. Right? So 69, let's call it 13. Let's call it 13 to 73. 60 years of being able to have kids. And the only thing that's limiting my ability to have kids in those 60 years is what?
How many women you're with?
How many women I can get with, and a need for sleep, eating, and drinking. Does that make sense, right? I can be like Wilt Chamberlain if I need to be. Okay? Right? That's the man. Can virtually have thousands of offspring, theoretically. Does that make sense? How many offspring can a woman have? One every 10 months. Right? And obviously you can have births, things of that sort, right? Okay? Let's say one every 10 months maximum. For how long are women capable of having kids? Well, from the age of 13 till early 40s. Right? Let's say 30 years. Does that make sense? Right? So that means women by nature are much more limited in how many offspring that they can have, right? Whereas men aren't. Right? They can still have a lot. My dad's one of 16 kids. Okay? That's, my little 5-foot-tall Irish grandma was a trooper, okay? Right? She popped out 16 kids. That's crazy, okay? Right? But it's still limited more than men are, right? So because of that, men and women have to differ in trying to maximize their offspring, right? Men, I guess women here, okay, they need to be selective because they're limited in the number of children they can have and raise in a lifetime, right? Whereas men, on the other hand, virtually unlimited, right? So because of this, now evolutionary theory would argue that we're going to desire different things. Right? Women are going to try to maximize their survival of the limited number of children, whereas men are just going to try to maximize the number of children that they can have. Does that make sense? Right? And we want to see this here. This predicts then that women should be more interested in social status because social status will do what? Create a more stable life, which will ensure things get provided for the offspring, which ensures success. Whereas men are going to be more interested in physical attractiveness. Why? Exactly, because physically attractive women are more fertile women, which tend to produce more healthy offspring, right? Which then makes it more likely that my genes are just going to pass on by sheer number. Does that make sense? So in this study, this is what's interesting here, because what we tend to think of is we saw that there's a lot of similarities that men and women have, right? We wanted a sense of humor. We wanted somebody who had similar interests to us, things of that sort. So there's a lot of similarities. But there was a couple key differences that came up there. Okay? So in this research, this is an important thing. Let's look at here in a high-budget situation. So what was done in this study was they gave people a budget of how many points or money could they spend on certain traits in their ideal mate. So basically, it's like a Build-A-Bear workshop. Okay? You build your ideal mate. Okay? And I say, think of it, anybody play fantasy football? Anybody? So I'm not going to use that analogy, okay? Not going to work, okay? Imagine that you have, those that play fantasy football know like auction leagues. Here's where you can think about this, okay? All right? I give you an unlimited number of funds to distribute on your ideal characteristics in your mate. Does that make sense? And what we tend to find is that when I can have almost anything I want, men and women report fairly similar desires for both physical attractiveness and social status. Does that make sense? If I can have it all, of course I want somebody who's physically attractive and has social status, regardless from a man or a woman. Does that make sense? But now let's look at it when it's a low budget, when I can't get everything that I want, right? When I'm limited in what I can get, right? Now all of a sudden we start to see these gender differences emerge, in that men really want and are willing to put more of their limited budget, limited resources into getting a physically attractive woman than a woman with high social status. Does that make sense? And vice versa. Women, less concerned. When push comes to shove, for women, okay, I can't have everything. I at least want somebody that's got social status. Does that make sense? Right? So when we can have it all, well, of course we want it. Right? But when push comes to shove, men want attractiveness, women want social status. Or at least prefer more. I don't want to say blanket outright, okay, but there's more of a preference for it. Okay? Does that kind of support the evolutionary perspective? Yeah? A little bit? Other evidence supporting this. Cross cultures, across time. Doesn't matter if it's here, if it's Papua New Guinea, if it's somewhere in the outback of Australia, or in Eastern Europe. There tends to be a universal favor for age in a mate, such that men like younger women and women like older men. This is pretty universal. This supports the evolutionary perspective. Why?
Older men are more settled.
More settled, such that what?
They have better social status, and younger women are typically more attractive.
Okay, but let's think about it from the evolutionary perspective. Let's take it that next step. You're not wrong in that, but why? What's the evolutionary perspective? That we're going to desire people that what?
Carry on the genes, help us carry on.
That are going to be more likely to assist us with passing on our genes. Right? Why would men prefer younger women? More fertile, more likely to produce healthy offspring. Right? But does that matter for me? Necessarily, because I'm just looking for... I say this more in a not what I'm looking for, okay? Right? Maybe if I committed to that person, more years of that, right? But even any one instance of mating, okay, any one instance of mating, I still want a younger person, regardless if they can give me many years of offspring, right? They're going to be they're more fertile, so it's more likely that one act is going to produce an offspring, right? Okay? And then also it's more likely that it's going to be a healthy child. Does that make sense? Why would women prefer older men, according to the evolutionary perspective?
They're more stable.
Such that, what?
They have better
better ability to take care of the child, and since I'm limited in the number of children I can have, that allows me to ensure what? That the children survive and are healthier. Does that make sense, right? So that supports this, okay? We also tend to see that men and women become jealous for different reasons. What do I mean by this? Okay, so men get jealous for what? Let me ask it to you this way, okay? Ladies and guys, let me ask you, think about it this way. Imagine that your significant other, okay, has recently developed a very strong friendship with a member of their opposite sex, okay, or the member of the gender that they're attracted to, of your gender. Does that make sense? Okay, imagine that. So if you're heterosexual male, imagine that your girlfriend, wife, has recently formed a really close working relationship with another guy. Or if you're a heterosexual woman, imagine that your husband, boyfriend, has recently formed a really close working relationship with another person, such that you're working late nights, and such that you come to find out that you guys are starting to talk about kind of personal details of your life. Not sexual details of your life, but sharing things about how the marriage, every relationship has its ups and downs, and they're kind of becoming a confidant for that person. But they're a member of the other sex, of your gender, but that person's opposite sex. Does that make sense? Okay? How would that really upset you? Okay? And now think about it this way. Compare what your reaction would be to that compared to finding out that your spouse was physically, sexually attracted to somebody, and there's been flirtation going on, and let's say they've hooked up a few times. Which do you think would make you more upset? The sexual one or the emotional one? How many say emotional would be more upsetting to me? Raise your hand up high. Look around the room. How many say the sexual one would be more upsetting to you? Okay. Just look around the room for a second, okay? Raise your hand again. Put your hand up high if you say the sexual would be more important to you. That you would be more upset about the sexual. Raise your hand up real high. Real high. Raise it up high. Don't be afraid. Raise it up high. Okay? Put their hands down. Raise your hand if the emotional would be more important or more hurtful to you. What do we see in this classroom? Right? Now, some of you are sitting here saying both are a problem, right? Is that what some of you are saying? I can't pick one. Both are a problem, right? But let's ignore that and that. For some people, both are equally bad. But let's just look at the pattern that we got here. The only people that had their hand up that thought emotional was worse were which gender? Women, right? The majority of people that had their hand up that said definitely sexual is worse are what? Men. Does that support this? Right? That's what we tend to find here, okay? Men are more upset by sexual infidelity. Women are more threatened by emotional infidelity. But let's take this the next step. Let's not just look at the demonstration and the pattern. Let's think about this. Why? How could an evolutionary perspective explain why men would be more upset by sexual infidelity and women would be more upset by emotional infidelity? Darren.
Well, for men, if there's sexual infidelity, she's not having my kid.
Right? Okay. If it's sexual infidelity, is she not having your kid?
Or she might not.
She might not be having your kid. Right? If she's sleeping around, how do you know whether that child is yours? Unless you go to Maury. Right? Or Jerry. Right? Okay. But think about it from an evolutionary perspective. We don't necessarily know that. Right? Okay. Now let's flip it a little bit. Emotional infidelity. Why would women be more upset by that? So, but what's the evolutionary reason why women should be more upset about a guy being emotionally unfaithful? Yeah. So therefore, from an evolutionary perspective, what does that do? So what does that do from an evolutionary perspective? You don't have, now those resources that should be going to provide for your offspring might be going to somebody else's offspring, which therefore by nature does what? Decreases the likelihood of your offspring surviving. Does that make sense? Right? So that's what the argument is from the evolutionary perspective. Men are more upset by sexual infidelity because now, if their partner is pregnant or has a child, especially before DNA testing, how could they ever be 100% sure that that is their offspring, that that is their genes? And also, if I'm providing resources for this child, I know I'm limited in my resources, right? And now I might be raising somebody else's child. So I'm not ensuring my offspring from or my genes from getting passed on. Does that make sense? Right? I joke about this with my wife all the time. Obviously, I have dark hair. My wife has dark hair. My daughter is blonde as blonde can be. So I always joke with her. I say, I'm just waiting until about, 15 years from now, some guy named Sven comes knocking on my door, right, and says, thank you for raising my kid. Okay? And it's just a joke with us, but it kind of speaks to this thing of, you don't know. How many of you guys have ever heard of that, where people will claim, that's not my kid because it doesn't look anything like me? That's just stupid. Okay, right? But I'm saying that tends to happen more. The argument that that's not my kid, he doesn't look anything like me, tends to happen more in relationships in which there's what? In which there's sexual infidelity, right? In which you know that the woman has had sex with other men. And then the men are more likely to make that argument. Does that make sense? So that's what's been proposed here as another reason for this evolutionary perspective. But there's also another cultural perspective of this, that it's not about evolution, okay? Rather, it's just about social roles, right? That women trade youth and beauty for money because they lack direct access to economic power. Right? Historically, is this kind of true? Yeah. Okay, you can make that argument. Is it less true now than it was in the past? Yeah, okay. So it's less true now than it was in the past, and that's going to come up here. The reason why I want to clarify that is that's going to come up here in the next slide. Okay? But we tend to see that women are in a disadvantaged situation in society. So this social cultural perspective argues it's not about evolution. It's about the way for me to get power and economic independence is to barter with what I have, which are my youth and my beauty. Does that make sense? Right? And we tend to see this here, that the more economic power the woman has, the more they actually prefer a male that's attractive versus one that has social status. Does that make sense? Right? They want their boy toy. The cougar, right? That might be financially independent, might have social status. We tend to see that they then prefer the younger, attractive male. Right? Anybody ever see a situation like this? Really?
Yeah, the female members of Congress have more attractive mates than most of your typical, relationships that you were to look at.
Really? I'll have to take a look at that and see. Are they younger? More likely to be younger than them?
Yeah.
Really? I'll have to take a look at that. I'll have to take a look at that. That might be interesting to look at.
Because we now have the first gay woman in Congress and like that. But yeah, for a lot of years.
That'd be interesting to look at. I'll have to take a look at that and see if there's anything on that. All right? Demi Moore?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Ashton Kutcher, right? For as long as that worked out for her. Mariah Carey and what's his name? What's his name? Nick Cannon. Okay. Yeah, and that's weird, isn't it? So she's a 10 and he's a... Yeah. Regardless, that's an example, though, of a financially independent woman kind of flipping the script a little bit. Okay. Any other examples you can think of?
Angelina Jolie went from Billy Bob Thornton to Brad Pitt.
But is Brad Pitt younger than her? No, Brad Pitt is still older than her. Yeah, but still, Brad Pitt is still older than she is, so she doesn't defy the older going for younger, right? Brad Pitt is still older than Angelina Jolie. All right, just goes to show how much older Billy Bob was, okay? All right, but you can see examples of that come up there, okay? Also, this argues, though, that men are fearful of sexual infidelity because it represents a threat to the relationship, not to fatherhood issues, okay? Because what it argues is that sexual infidelity actually suggests emotional infidelity. Does that make sense? It's not necessarily because I don't know if the kid is mine, but because if you're sleeping with somebody, that's obviously a threat to the relationship, and it suggests emotional infidelity at the same time. Okay? And that might be the debate that some of you are having of they're both bad. Right? Because are they really that much different? Right? And what we see evidence of this is that when we have people recall past actual infidelity of their partner, we tend to find that men are more upset about emotional infidelity than sexual infidelity, which is the same as women. When you ask men, like I did, which are you going to be more likely to be upset about? Men think I'm going to be more likely to be upset about sexual infidelity. But when we sit there and say, think back on your past relationships, what were you most upset about? Men, like women, reported being most upset about emotional infidelity than sexual infidelity. Then lastly, the most important thing. We talk about these gender differences. This is the same thing as when we talk about differences between cultural groups, differences between racial groups, right? Yeah, they are differences. But when we focus so much on the differences, we fail to acknowledge that they have a lot more in common than they have dissimilar or not in common. Does that make sense? Right? This goes to show with in-group, out-group bias. Right? Races are a lot more similar than they are dissimilar, but we tend to focus on the dissimilarity. Men and women are a lot more similar in their mate preferences than they are dissimilar, but we tend to focus on the dissimilarity. Right? So all of this argues then, this perspective is socio-cultural in nature and saying it's not evolutionary. It's not that. It's just something that we've been acculturated to. Right? And if we lived in a society in which women were the ones that were in power, we'd see the script flipped. Right? Which would go definitely in the face of evolutionary perspective. All right. Let's move on from this and talk about some relationship stuff. And we're running a little behind here. I'm not worried about it. Quarter's almost over. Only 2 weeks left. You guys excited about that? No? You know what the beauty is for this class? You only have one thing left. Final exam. Then some quizzes, possibly. Okay? But the reality is, your work in this course is pretty much over. I should not say that, okay? You still have the final, okay? But you guys, for all that you have of final papers due in other courses, things of that sort, just think about how nice I am to schedule it so that the majority of your course is done before the chaos ensues of all the other classes finishing up and having papers due the last week of class. Right? Does that make sense? Right? Part of the reason I schedule the course that way. Okay? So you guys can kind of just be like, all right, 2 weeks, I'm almost done. Okay? Let's focus on some relationships here. And we're, like I said, are a little bit behind. No big deal. All right? We'll get through what we get through before the final. Don't stress about this class any further. Okay? Well, you're going to have a final. Of course you are. Right? Right? So, well, no, so study, but don't make this the most significant, stressful class, okay? So, when we talk about relationships, let's get rid of attraction, mate preference, things of this sort. Let's talk about forming a relationship with other people. Let's forming an intimate relationship. By intimate, what do I mean? Close relationship. Does it mean being married? Is being married an intimate relationship? But are all intimate relationships only a romantic relationship? No, right? Intimate relationships are just close relationships. Give me examples. Marriage, obviously, is one. What's another type of? Family is going to be another one. It's going to be another one? Maybe military service, right? Okay, brothers in arms. Close friends. Anything else? Possibly kids, with the one exception that I'll say on that. I heard it from over here. Was it? Oh, Kaylin? Okay. With the one exception of that is kids you don't really kind of select to be in a relationship with them, right? It kind of occurs, right? So you're correct to a certain extent because we can say family also is a close relationship, right? But most of what we're going to talk about are going to be kind of relationships where you choose to be part of it, okay? What's that? Possibly a therapist and a client. Could be, all right? These intimate relationships, they all have basically a few components, okay? There's some sort of feeling of attachment, affection, or love in this relationship. You feel committed to this person. You feel emotionally bonded with this person. Does that make sense? There's some fulfillment of psychological needs going on. You get something from this relationship. And then lastly, there is an interdependence between the partners. Okay? There is a codependency going on here. Okay? You rely on that individual, and that individual also relies on you for something. Okay? That's what we mean by these intimate relationships. Okay? There's an emotional component to it. There's attachment, affection, love. Okay? There's a psychological component that's not emotional in the sense you're getting something from this person. Okay? And then also there's this interdependence. There's this dyadic relationship going on there. Okay? Well, I get something from you, you get something from me, we rely on each other. Okay? And the question then is, well, how do these first encounters, first meeting somebody, right? I'm assuming by this point in your life we've all, in one way or another, had a relationship that we would classify as an intimate relationship. Not necessarily romantic. Could be a close friendship. Let's remove family from this perspective here. Could be a close friendship, or it could be a romantic relationship. But I'm assuming at this point we've all had some relationship that we'd say is intimate. How did that relationship develop? Obviously, you went from an initial attraction. But between the initial attraction and all of a sudden you're in an intimate relationship, what happened there along the way? Okay, there's communication. What's that? Exposure. Challenging times, so there's communication, getting to know the person. I'm assuming that's what you mean by exposure, like learning something about the person, getting to know. Challenging times. Okay, a lot of time with that person. Okay. Let me ask you this. Did the relationship, does it go through, think back if you've had more than one relationship. Does it kind of go through the same set of stages? Or does each relationship kind of go at its own pace and its own sequence with its own kind of each relationship kind of almost evolves as it evolves, but it isn't a predictable set of stages?
With romantic relationships, I thought there's a lot of honeymoon period, when you first get together, and then it kind of stabilizes, and it's kind of...
So you would argue that romantic relationships, what?
That there is a series of steps.
That there might be a series of stages that occur in a romantic relationship? What do you guys think? Darren?
I think there might be a set of stages, but with different relationships, those stages can either be shorter or longer.
But are you going through the stages in kind of the same sequence?
I would say not always. Sometimes sequences are reversed because of situations around you. You're forced to deal with this instead of this first.
Okay. So that would argue then that it's not a stage system, right? There might be certain milestones that a relationship goes through, okay? But a stage theory would propose that you kind of do A, then B, then C, and that's how it progresses. And although it might be different lengths of time at any one of those stages, it's always going to go through in that sequence. Do you guys think that that's true? How many say, yeah, it seems kind of appropriate? How many say, no, relationships are much more dynamic than that? Okay? let's take a look at this and see what's suggested here, okay? So here's one stage theory that's developed, okay? And this is the stimulus value role theory. And what this proposes is that we go through a series of stages in a relationship and building that intimate relationship. The first is the stimulus stage, then there's the value stage, then there's the role stage, okay? This stimulus stage, there's an initial attraction that occurs, all right? We've already talked about attraction. Okay, but that's the stimulus. Okay, we see the stimulus, that other person, we're attracted to that person. Then from there, there's a value stage in which you become attached to somebody based upon the similarity of their values and their beliefs. Okay, so that's the initial attraction, and then you get to know this person a little bit more, become to be attached to them because you have similar values and beliefs. And then lastly, there's the role stage in which you then become committed to that person because you're performing certain roles in the relationship, whether it's husband and wife, whether it's boyfriend and girlfriend, whether it's two friends that are performing specific roles. Okay? But it would propose then that every relationship kind of goes through this attraction, then attachment, then a commitment phase. Okay? What do you think? Does that do a good job of kind of explaining relationships and how they develop? Yeah? Why?
Trying to find out as much about a person unless you're attracted to them in the first place.
Okay. And you're not going to be committed to somebody until you're attached to them? Okay. You agree? Yeah? Anybody disagree? Okay.
I think that might be, the average or above the mean, but not always. I think you could meet somebody that, you are attracted to, then you get committed for, it could be work, it could be some other situation where the commitment comes in first, where you have to be with them, and then the attachment grows out of that commitment.
What do you think? Is that true? So you're in a committed role, and then all of a sudden attraction develops out of committed roles?
But I don't think that that's the case in romantic relationships.
You don't think that's the case in romantic relationships? You guys agree? Victor, what did you mention? What about arranged marriages? Can love ever come from an arranged marriage? Okay. But these stage theories argue that these are the stages that relationships go through in this sequence. Is an arranged marriage that results in an intimate relationship going through this sequence?
No, because that commitment that's talking about emotional commitment, whereas an arranged marriage is more of a physical commitment.
Is it talking about emotional commitment? It's saying that you're based on performance of certain roles. You're committed to performing certain roles in the relationship.
You don't see any of that first.
But
You're married and then take on roles.
exactly. So you take on the roles before what? Before there's necessarily even an attachment or attraction. Right? But then you could be committed, and then through the steps of being committed, you become attracted and then attached to somebody. Does that make sense? The best example I can see of this, which is a horrible example, but I blame it on having a 3-year-old daughter, Beauty and the Beast. A commitment, certain roles, right? That initially they hate each other, but they're committed to certain roles that then produces attraction and then attachment. Does that kind of make sense? Could also be related to proximity and exposure, right? Okay, but there's a commitment to a specific role. Also can explain partially why clients often become attracted to their therapist. right? There's a specific role that they're committed to, and then out of those roles, attraction and attachment can be produced. Does that make sense? Or you could even do it backwards of committed, then there's an attachment based upon those roles that then produces the attraction. Does that make sense, right? So because of that, although this makes sense at face value, and you sit there and you say, wow, this could be an explanation as to how we develop through relationships. Because of this, really, most researchers reject these stage theories because they're too simplistic. It argues that relationships are much more dynamic than this. Relationships aren't a specific series of steps or a fixed sequence. Rather, they're dynamic, they're fluid. Okay? And there's basically two categories of theories that try to explain relationship formation and continuation that aren't stage theories. Some of these are called reward theories. And in reward theories, as it sounds, quantity counts. The rewards count. It's almost an economic approach. There's also qualitative theories, though, that discuss the difference between liking and loving. Right? Think about that for a second. Is there a difference between liking and loving? Ooh. Okay, that's interesting. I was sitting there thinking of, like the difference between, that's taking a different perspective, which is completely valid, right? Okay. Is it possible to love somebody but not like them? Yeah, family. Okay, family. What about in a romantic relationship? Is it possible to like somebody without loving them? Right? They're qualitatively different, right? Like, I like you a lot. Okay? Right? Okay? Right? What do you think the odds are of a girl like me and a guy like you? Does somebody know what I'm talking about here? Please, thank you. Somebody knows Dumb and Dumber, okay? I'm saying not good, right? More like 1 in a million. So you're saying there's a chance, okay? Right? But liking is qualitative. It feels different. That's what we mean by qualitative, right? Liking feels different than love, right? Even if it's a romantic relationship, if you like somebody, what do we usually call that? A crush, right? Or even if it's a really passionate liking of somebody, what do we call it? It's not a crush at that point in time. Infatuation, right? Okay, you're infatuated with somebody, right? How many times were you in high school and you sat there and you said, but I love him so much, and your parents are like, you don't love him, it's just an infatuation, right? It's the difference between puppy love and love, right? They're qualitatively different. Does that make sense, right? So other theories will talk about trying to explain the relationship between these different types of relationships. I guess I shouldn't say relationship, but explaining the associations amongst these different types of relationships. Okay? Now, we're running short on time today, but I want to introduce social exchange theory. In the next class, we're going to jump into finishing up social exchange theory. Okay? Social exchange theory. What does it sound like? Is this a quantitative theory or a qualitative theory? Quantitative, okay? Social exchange. We're exchanging things. Think of stock exchange. It's an economic model. Social exchange theory. Okay? I love it. It's numbers-based. It's objective. None of this crappy, lovey-dovey, qualitative, like versus love. Let's just get down to bare bones, just the facts, okay? Right? And it's a very basic model that says that in any relationship, whether it's friendship, whether it's romance, whatever it might be, a business relationship, we are motivated to maximize our rewards and minimize our cost. Does that make sense? Right? We're motivated to get as much as we can with losing as little as possible. Right? We're selfish. We try to look out for ourselves. Right? Does that make sense? And because of that, we're going to stay in relationships longer if those relationships provide more rewards and fewer costs. Does that make sense? Now, what's the important thing here? Is it whether those relationships really provide more rewards or fewer costs? It's our perception of how many rewards and how much is it costing me. That's the key thing with social exchange theory. It's not what the absolute rewards and costs are. It's my perception of the rewards and the cost of this relationship. Does that make sense? And therefore, intimate relationships are going to be related to, whether a relationship is intimate or not, is going to be related to the overall amount of rewards that I'm getting out of this relationship. Does that make sense? Relationships in which I'm getting a lot more rewards than I'm putting in, when that balance is more favoring towards rewards, are going to develop into more intimate relationships. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, let me see here if I can, let me get out of this here for a second, because we'll probably come into describing these various levels here next class. Okay. What is a reward and what is a cost? What's a reward that would be in a relationship? Okay, what's the cost of a relationship? Argument. Fighting. That's a cost of a relationship, right? Okay, so there's a cost. Want to give me another cost of a relationship? Finances, right? If I'm putting money into the relationship, give me an example of a financial cost of a relationship. Having to buy him gifts, okay. What would be another example of a financial cost? I have to pay the bills, all right? Not just I have to pay the bills to cover myself, but I have to do what? Pay your bills, because you're too damn lazy to get a job, right? That's a financial cost, right? What could be another financial cost? Dating, exactly. Courtship, things along those lines could be a financial cost. What about if I leave a job to go with that person? Would that be a financial cost? Okay, so there's financial cost. There's arguments that could be a cost. What could be another cost in a relationship? Okay, let's come with the two of them, okay? One, time, right? I'm putting not just time, but biological clock time. Does that make sense, right? I'm spending my time, which I'm with somebody for 2-3 years. That's 2-3 of my prime years, right? Family. If family doesn't like the person, right? Say I lose connection with family because of this relationship. That could be another cost, right? All right? Or let's say you end up moving away from family. You're not really losing, it's not the family doesn't like that person, right? But you end up moving with somebody away. Is there a cost associated with that? Social cost, right? So these can be financial costs. These can be personal costs. They can be psychological costs of fighting and arguments and things of that sort. They can be social cost as well. All right? We just focus on a lot of negatives. What are some rewards of relationships? Yeah. Family, okay? So now I can get social or family rewards of being with this person and having a family. Okay. What are other rewards of relationships? There you go. Good sex. Or sex in general. Okay? Right? Don't know about any bad sex. Okay? Right? All right? So having sex. Okay? That's a reward of a relationship. What else? Happiness. What else? Companionship. What else? Stability. What type of stability? So there could be emotional stability, social stability, financial stability, right? So we can see here, just like there's costs that are social, personal, psychological, financial, relationships can also provide social, personal, psychological, financial rewards. Does that make sense? Right? And this is going to matter because, again, remember, it's the perception of these things that are going to come into play. Okay? Next class on Wednesday, we're going to jump into talking about these. Please reread this social exchange theory and come. Be prepared to tell me what is a comparison level. What is a comparison level for alternatives? Be able to distinguish amongst the two of those. Okay?